Exclusives. I hate exclusives, but I understand why they exist. This was the sentence I used to start off my original video, but I wanted to cover some more topics than I did the first time around. Now, before I get carried away, I do want to say that exclusive games are not always a bad thing. In the case of Nintendo, Steam, first-party exclusivity, there are actually quite a few areas in which exclusives are beneficial for the games industry, and I want to talk about those certain types of exclusives before I really start this video. I hear a lot of people ask why console exclusives are often labeled as bad, and it's just not that black and white. See, companies like Sony and Microsoft make consoles that third-party developers make games for. If Sony and Microsoft make and publish their own game, well, that's great. That makes them just like the rest of these studios out there, contributing a game to the industry that without them never would have existed. They may even lock it to their console, which kinda sucks, but as a business move makes sense and is done in almost every industry out there. See, consoles have to have some sort of edge, something that makes you the consumer think, I want an Xbox instead of a PlayStation, and a long while ago, these companies would compete by benefiting the consumer. Microsoft had backwards compatibility, Sony had free online, but as things changed and the industry started targeting its audience as dollar signs instead of gamers, these console manufacturers learned real quick how easy it was to entice people. Forget backwards compatibility, screw letting you play games with your friends without a cost, no. We can just buy games from studios who are already making them anyway and hostage them off to our console alone. The more exclusives I have, the more people buy my console. The richer I become, meaning the more exclusives I can hostage off. And this is where it gets crappy for the industry and, more importantly, the consumer. Now, before I go too far with this, I want to discuss the PC. I already know there are going to be people out there asking, well, wait a minute, Barry, you PC elitist prick. Why aren't PC exclusives bad for the industry? Or are you just biased? And that's a very good question. If it were up to me, no games would ever be restricted from you. As a gamer, I respect your right to play any video game you choose, and the fact that we are locked away at all is ridiculous, though there are some pretty understandable reasons sometimes. For example, when it comes to hardware, the PC as a platform is practically unrestricted. This is why games like Star Citizen, for example, can only exist on the PC. And even if a console could play Star Citizen, which hardware-wise would be totally possible, the input devices are limited as well. Yet another thing that PC as a gaming platform doesn't hinder you from. Not only can you use any controller you want, but a keyboard and mouse, allowing developers an immense amount of creative freedom that they just wouldn't have access to had they made a console-only game. And then besides both of those things, Sony and Microsoft asked quite a large fee to put games in their marketplace. I remember a small indie dev complaining that he had to fork over $40,000 just to patch the console version of his video game. I remember Binding of Isaac developer Edmund McMillan facing a similar problem with the PlayStation version of the Binding of Isaac. Hindering developers is not good for anyone, and this is why exclusives on the PC aren't typically volatile. And I say typically because being that we are part of an open system, this kind of crap happens all the time. So there are some downsides to everything, but when it comes to creative freedom, this little byproduct is a small price to pay. Well, that's the difference between a PC gamer like you and a console gamer like me, Barry. I may not have as many games, but I have access to higher quality games, and this is where I have to disagree. I've heard it said before that console gamers and PC gamers are different, expecting certain levels of quality in their games, and this very well may be true. PC gamers respect unique mechanics, games with a little strategy, creative ideas, and stories, and are just more diverse as a whole. This is evident by the variety of games on our platform. Whereas console gamers don't typically care so much so long as the games keep coming in. See, with input devices limited as a controller, there's not a lot of innovation these developers can do. So, oftentimes when you have a new console exclusive game, it ends up being graphically pleasing to make up for that, and then sticks to the same old concepts. First-person or third-person shooter with stealth elements in a large open world with hopefully a really good story. And don't get me wrong, I'm definitely not saying these games are bad. I'm also not saying the stereotypes between console gamers and PC gamers are necessarily true. But when you're gaming on a system that locks you down, restricts the way you can play, and focuses most of its efforts on making money more so than making something out of passion, I just don't find myself interested anymore, and I look at companies that Sony's bought up, and I can only imagine how great their games would be if they weren't restricted. And for those of you out there who don't think games being limited to one console negatively affects them, check this out. How many copies of Bloodborne do you think were sold? The answer is 2.9 million. Dark Souls 3 outsold Bloodborne by 100,000 copies, and Dark Souls 2 outsold it by over 5 million. The Last of Us only sold 6 million copies. Halo 5, 5 million copies. Horizon Zero Dawn only sold 7 million copies, and these games are supposed to be the greatest games out there. Yet none of them come close to touching the list of the best-selling video games ever. In fact, if you look at this list, most of these games are multiplats. Not that sales always equal quality, but when it comes to these developers, they're being tied down. Imagine if The Last of Us or Uncharted had been a multiplat. Imagine how much better Naughty Dog would have been had they not had to rely on Sony. But their games aren't meant to be more than a ploy to make Sony's console look better, and we act like children. Exclusives cause fanboyism, elitism, anti-consumerism, and promotes laziness and restricts development. You'll see fans of a platform raving in happiness when they find out that only they can play the newest video game. Haha, I can brag to my friends about how they're not allowed to play this one. You see petitions on change.org, people pleading that multi-plat games be restricted to their console so nobody else can play it but them. Little did these fans realize that what they're begging for is a more locked down and restricted version of a video game that could have been much better, had a larger player count, and could have been more innovative had it been a multi-plat. Imagine if I was an artist and couldn't have access to red paint because I bought brushes from Low Cornell instead of Da Vinci. I'm a gamer and I want to appreciate the art that video games are, and if I want that as a gamer, I shouldn't be steamrolled by any greedy corporation. Well, hang on a minute, Barry. I know I keep interrupting, but there's something you're not taking into consideration here. If these companies that Sony's grabbed up would do so much better without Sony, then why don't they leave? Well, have you ever heard of EA? Electronic Arts is the master of grabbing up little developers, contracting them until death, and then squeezing the life out of them until they're dried out and forgotten, and then moves on to the next one. The only difference between Sony and EA is EA hasn't made a console yet. Also, Sony cares at least a little bit, which is more than you can say about Electronic Arts. Now you may be wondering why I haven't but barely mentioned Nintendo in all of this. When it comes to exclusivity, Nintendo has to be the biggest culprit, right? Are they the worst of all? Well, not exactly. You see, Nintendo's very different in that all their exclusives are made in-house by them. They'll work with other devs personally, and they're always involved. Nintendo also isn't restrictive in their input devices. They design innovative ideas and gimmicks that tie into the games you play. To take you a step further into being part of the game, they actively implore group gaming. They make games designed around the couch. Their exclusives are made by them, not bought from some company and shoved onto their platform. And again, they innovate. Even old games that we played before, we can play in a whole new way just by picking up a Nintendo Switch or DS. And this passion, these proactive ideas make me as a gamer think, you know, I could play Skyrim on my computer, but then again, I could play it on the Switch, which is something you'll never hear me say in regards to Skyrim on the PlayStation, but I can't deny the fact that exclusives are what keeps consoles alive. I can make a bet, and it's a pretty safe bet on my side, that without exclusives, Sony and Microsoft wouldn't sell consoles in the numbers they do today. I may even go as far as to say that they would fail, and if that's the case, if Sony and Microsoft would fail, then they have no reason to be in this industry. This one thing keeps them relevant. That's not a very good business if you ask me. Without exclusives, consoles would have to be judged on their own merits, promoting a fair industry and decision for consumers who have access to any game they want to play. This should be how it is. This used to be how things worked, enticing the consumer with real benefits, not locking them and developers down with no other choice. Microsoft has been taking steps in the right direction recently, and I'm curious to see how that pans out for them. The gaming industry is large, consisting of developers, games, companies, consumers, exclusives, and they're not going away no matter how unethical they may be. But gamers always find a way. Emulators, hacked consoles, I mean, mine's not exactly hacked, but I can put any one of these exclusive titles on it. Here, let me show ya. Yeah, I'll be killing myself now. Bye, guys. You see, Nintendo's very different in that all their exclusive... Exclusives. There are actually quite a few areas in which exclusives are beneficial for the games industry, and I want to talk about those certain types of exclusives before I really start this video. God, that word just trips me up every single time. Exclusive. Exclusive. Can I just say a different word? Aren't PC exclusive games exclusive games? I hate this word. Before I go, I wanted to talk about this. This is a game called Valhalla Battle Royale, and it's essentially going to be a medieval battle royale game. I got to play a little bit of the demo, which is more like a proof of concept, but if you're interested in medieval games like I am, these guys still needed help and asked if I could let you guys know about it. Their Indiegogo is in the description, and they told me that when the game's released, they'll give me some game codes to play with you guys. I'll let you know more on Twitter as I'm updated. I may dedicate a full video review to it someday, but for now I thought putting it in a video about exclusives would be fitting. Thanks, guys.